Good afternoon, folks. I think we'll get the meeting started. We do have a number of folks off on March break this week, but we do have quorum, so let's go. We've been doing a roll call as you've been coming into the room, so I'll dispense with that. If everyone could just look over the agenda that was sent out, I'd like for motion to approve the agenda as presented. Moved by Bev Holmes, seconded by Helen. All in favor? That's approved. Next, we're on to the approval of the board minutes from February the 22nd, 2023. Could I have a motion to approve those minutes? Moved by John Carreau, seconded by Paul Kehoe. All in favor? The minutes are approved. Next up, we have the moment most of us have been waiting for, looking at the weather and watching the snow slowly disappear. Happily that it's slowly disappearing. We have a state of the watershed update from Jen North. The floor is yours, Jen.
Good afternoon. So I will be updating you on current conditions and a little bit about the spring outlook, and then Euro will take over and discuss our current water management strategies. So one of the main causes for our current above average current conditions is that we've had above average precipitation amounts since November. This on top of our January melt has produced more water in the system than what we would normally see in any given year. So this is kind of the cause of what's happening right now. And you can switch to the next slide. So current conditions, snow conditions across our watershed are still sitting slightly above normal. Sorry, not slightly, is sitting above normal for most of the winter season. Our March 1st amounts are kind of comparative to 2019. With the greatest amounts are in the western portion of the watershed. Next slide. Great. We are still aggressively drawing down Crotch Lake and the upper lakes in order to have full storage capacity for the spring. We are still seeing higher than normal elevations on Crotch due to the amount of water that was in the system that we are currently trying to get out. But with the current decreasing trend, we are very optimistic that we will reach our target before we see any substantial runoff. The long range forecast from the MNRF is still indicating a cooler, slightly wet spring. Looking at short-term forecasts, we are seeing a couple weeks of 5-degree weather during the daytime and dropping down during the night. So this is great to see, and will hopefully trend to a slow and steady melt. That's kind of the best weather where we see sublimation and just that kind of slow melt that hopefully will get rid of some of the extra water in our watershed before we see any really substantial runoff when the warmer weather and rain hits. So MVCA issued a water conditions flood outlook for the Mississippi and Carp River watersheds on March 3rd. We will be updating that message on the 16th, which is this Friday or Thursday, once we see the current snow measurements. So we'll be going out on Wednesday to have another to do another snow survey, and with that data, we'll be able to kind of predict where we're sitting right now. Hopefully we're kind of at the same that we were in March 1st, or a little bit lower would be wonderful, but that data will kind of indicate where we're sitting at going into April. And any additional messages will be issued as the spring unfolds. So we'll kind of shorten that message to more of a weekly when things start to move, and if things really start to move, then we will shorten it to daily messaging. Staff will continue to monitor conditions daily and evaluate when it would be necessary to begin to store water to ensure that summer target levels are reached. For our spring outlook, again, anything can happen in the next month based on our data from the March 1st snow readings and the long range forecasts. We are expecting above average spring peak for the Mississippi River watershed. The Ottawa River Basin forecasters are observing average conditions for both levels, flows, and snowpack. So the Ottawa River may see a slightly more average freshet. But again, the big deciding factor for this year will be how quickly temperatures rise and how much rain we get on top of everything. Perfect.
All right, thank you, Jen. So I just wanted to add a couple comments as we are preparing, for this upcoming spring freshet season. So I guess my first comment is about our river system. As you can see on this slide, we have over 40 water control structures in our watershed. Most of them were built at the turn of the century to support logging operations in our watershed. Over time, some of them were rebuilt and upgraded for more functionality. A good example is hydropower production, recreation, aquatic, and wildlife habitat. But over these 40 structures, only 12 are included in our water management plan. You can see them here, and from those 12, only 6 have actually active storage. that we can utilize in the spring to alleviate flooding. So I guess my first message here is that our system was not designed or built for flood protection. Okay, there's only a certain storage that we have that we can work with, and we can alleviate the flooding. We can reduce the severity of the flooding, but we cannot just eliminate and completely protect the flooding that might occur. Next slide, please. So as you know, our water management plan dictates us that in the fall, we are drawing down our lakes to the minimum winter levels to basically generate the storage that is needed for the spring runoff, to capture the spring runoff. As Jen mentioned, we were dealing with an unusual fall and winter this year, right, with a well above average rainfall precipitation starting in November, going into February. Plus, we had some major snowmelt event in early January, kind of like early in the winter, and then a secondary snowmelt event in the February. So combine all this, you know, we're seeing above average lake levels in our watershed. And I guess the second message that I wanted to make today is that any winter dam operations needs to be done really carefully, because, you know, they may lead to unstable ice conditions, obviously, and you know, like our lakes are used for recreation in winter, snowmobiling, ice fishing, and all that. So we need to be really careful what we do in winter, right? How to deal with that situation. Plus, you know, like changing water levels can also break up the ice and potentially lead to damage to docks, to, you know, like properties, infrastructure, and can also damage environment, you know, lead to shoreline erosion and all that, right? So that kind of ties our hands as to what we can or can't do. So in last, you know, 2-3 weeks, as we're moving into spring, we have been gradually trying to move the excess water through the system. And again, you know, we had to do it, you know, we're looking at the timing, you know, we have those 5 big lakes in the headwaters of our watershed. We have Crouch, and obviously anything that we release from those headwater lakes will eventually end up in Crouch. So the timing is critical, how we move the water down the system. It's not a simple system. And we also need to look at the potential combined outflow so that we are not causing flooding, you know, downstream of Crouch, in Dalhousie Lakes, and any other downstream areas, right? So, but, you know, like we've been basically looking at the system last 2-3 weeks, and as you can see, the blue range is basically the target where we want to be. And as you see that, these are the main, I'm missing one lake here, I think Masna, but all the other lakes are basically, we see that we are almost where we need to be. So I think we are getting well positioned for the upcoming freshet that we expect, you know, to happen most likely, you know, at the end of this month, early April. Next slide, please. So this is actually a figure that shows the entire historical record for Mississippi River and Appleton, starting on the vertical axis you see here. So it started in 1919 and it goes all the way to 2021. And the horizontal axis is basically months, January, February, all the way to December. And basically what I want to say is that we call this an unusual winter or unusual fall, but this might become a new normal in our watershed, because, you know, we're looking at the climate change projections, and they're actually suggesting that we will be seeing more rain and less snow in winter. We will see milder winters leading to more snowmelt events throughout the winter, right? And when you look at this figure, which basically the coloring is, the light colors is low flow, the darker colors is higher flow, the red is like really like flood events, right? So like that's the scale: dark, high, light, low. And what you see is that actually starting in December, January, February, as we go over the 100-year record, we see more and more dark colors, which means that indeed, you know, what the climate change projections are suggesting, we already seeing that captured in our data set, that we will be receiving more and more flows and rain and volume of water in December, January, February, and less late in the in later winter and in early spring. So why I'm just saying this is because obviously we will need to adapt our existing water management plan so that we don't end up, because where this might lead eventually is that we will not have enough water to fill up our lakes in the spring. Thank you. Let us know if any questions.
Thanks, you two. Does anyone have any questions? Richard?
Yeah, Jennifer, you say that rain and temperature controls, what if it is, does frost in the ground? Is that-
It is a fact, it's a small fact. So frost in the ground, if we see, lots of frost in the ground, we won't get that penetration when the water does melt. It'll just quickly run off and we'll see more of runoff. Compared to, if it was we had a dry fall and there was lots, and if the ground was unfrozen, it would just penetrate in. So it's a small factor when you compare it to the amount of snow on the ground, how quickly, like if you see 20-degree weather, like that's going to how fast the snow melts. So if we see a slow and steady melt, yes, we could see more penetration into the ground if it was a dry year. But if you have that really quick melt, it's going to come into the system no matter what. And then, sorry, should I be using that?
Ideally, yes.
And then, of course, rain is another major factor.
Yeah, for sure. No, just that there is no frost.
Yeah. But we did have a fairly wet November, December, so we might see that the ground is already much saturated, that we're not going to get much penetration through.
Thanks. Anyone else have any questions? Anyone online? No, I have a question for Euro. In terms of that long-term forecast, what are the solutions that we should be looking for? Is it more nimble control of the water levels using our structures, or is it finding more reservoir capacity?
Well, that would be one, finding more capacity, but also changing, the way that how much water we leave in our system for winter. Right, so we would really need to be looking and revisiting our winter targets. So that would be one solution to have more water stored throughout the winter so that we don't run into drought conditions in the spring and in the summer next year.
Thank you. Thank. Next up, we have a proposal for the Kashawakimak Lake Dam Environmental Assessment Project and a suggested motion that the Board of Directors award the Kashawakimak Dam Class Environmental Assessment Project to McIntosh and Perry in the amount of $101,410 plus HST. Could I have a mover for this, please? Moved by Helen Yance, seconded by Bev Holmes. And you're up.
All right, well, thank you. So Kashawakimak is one of our oldest dams in our watershed. The existing structure was built in 1910, so the structure is 113 years old and at the very end of its life. We have completed a comprehensive dam safety review last year that basically reconfirmed the urgent need to replace this structure, and also recommended a Class EA process to initiate the project. Last year, we also applied for federal funding to support this project through Infrastructure Canada DMAF program, which is the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Program. When we were successful, so we received federal funding that will contribute up to 40% of the total project cost, eligible cost, which translates to about $2.3 million. And we also, early this year, we applied for provincial WECI funding to also help us to finance this project. And if successful, the WICI funding will contribute additional 30% for at least this first stage of the project, which is the Class EA. The official results will be available by end of May, but we have some unofficial results that are suggesting that all the initial applications that were applied as part of the first round will be funded by the province. So I think that's good news that we might be counting on this additional 30% for this project. So I think it's really good news to share. So the Class EA, the RFP was issued in January and the process closed earlier this month. We received 4 submissions, 4 proposals, which we ranked according to our evaluation criteria. You can find all the details in my report. And the highest rank was received, we attributed to a submission from McIntosh Perry, which basically is our recommendations to the board is to endorse award of this project to McIntosh Perry, and the amount was $101,410 for this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Yair. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this? Paul, go ahead. Could you turn on your mic, Paul?
Yeah. Just a question for you. Mac Perry is not a traditional dam group. Do they have experience doing this again? Because that's sort of out of their bailiwick from what I've ever dealt with them, and I've dealt with them a lot.
Yeah, they have experience with, they've done projects, Class A projects for dams that are owned by the Ministry of Natural Resources, and they are really strong in the Class EA process. So they have a very, very strong team to lead the Class EA. Obviously, that the preliminary and detailed design of the replacement will be a separate project. For that project, obviously, we will be looking for someone who has a very good dam experience.
Thanks for that. Anyone else? I'll put the question to the floor. All in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you, folks. Next, we have another contract award. The suggested motion is that the Board of Directors approve award of the Mill of Kintail Museum roof replacement to Remember Me Roofing in the amount of $36,019.50 plus HST, and authorize an $8,000 contingency to deal with the unexpected expenses that may be incurred. Can I have a mover for this, please? Moved by Paul Kehoe, seconded by, I'm still learning names, Mary Lou Suter, Mississippi Mills. And this is Scott Lowrick.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So just a quick update on the project. I know I spoke about this a couple months ago, but for those that are new, this is at the Mill of Kintail property that we have off of Concession 8, just outside of Almont. It's quickly becoming one of my favorite places. It's a really nice property on the Indian River. So in 2001, on our museum that houses the collection for Art Tate McKenzie and artifacts for Dr. James Naismith, the roof was replaced. It was originally an asphalt shingle roof. It was replaced with cedar shakes. And then it would have been earlier last year, we started to notice a fair amount of leaking, in which we had a condition report done, as well as we had that company mitigate the issue. So there were a number of leaks that they had to fix to help us get us through the winter. It's at the point now where that roof is beyond its life cycle and needs to be replaced. So when I first stood up here, I was big on the steel roof side of things, just based on the longevity of the product and the ability for us to basically be maintenance free in the uncertainty of where the financial model is heading for this property. That was something big on my list. Is at least it took the financial burden off the future in terms of major projects like this. I've kind of changed my tune since then due to further research. So there is now a composite shingle model out there that has a greater warranty than the steel roof, and also a greater workmanship warranty provided with the product. So we went through a couple options with various companies on the roof itself. The steel roof option had a maximum of a 40-year warranty. The new shingles we're looking at is a 50-year product warranty. The steel roof was anywhere from a 2 to 5 year workmanship. And then the company we are looking at is offering a 10-year workmanship with this product as well. So it's taking a fair amount of financial risk out of future years for this property. It also comes at a fraction of the cost of what we were looking at for a steel roof. So for the steel roof, we're quoted anything between about $90,000 up to $110,000. This is coming in with tax and everything right at about $40,000. So it's from our standpoint, it's a good financial model. From a property maintenance standpoint, it provides a good, hopefully a sustainable product, which will take a lot of the uncertainty of this project in future years and hopefully lays that to rest. So with that, we do have the two buildings that are on the property that are deemed and designated heritage buildings. So I did have to go through the Mississippi Mills Heritage Committee for approval on the project. I did take our proposed solution of the composite shingle to them. They are in favor of that as well. So they've approved this. And it largely had to do with, we are able to keep a very similar look and feel with the shingle option as to what's there for the cedar shake. So they actually have it's called a shake wood option, which is designed to look very similar to cedar shakes. And really it's hard to see from here, but that roof is about 3 stories up. So once we put new shingles on there, it'll probably be very hard to tell the difference between what's on there now and what'll be put on there. And it'll be a modern product that will obviously last a lot longer. The reason for the $8,000 contingency that we're putting forth is we haven't really touched some of the infrastructure that's on that building. So with the roof being replaced, the actual eaves troughs are going to be replaced as well as part of this project and part of the budget number that's being put forth. So we are a little worried that once we pull those eaves troughs off, the soffit and the fascia that is attached to it may or may not be any good. So we're just trying to build some contingencies into this project to ensure that we're not coming up against a big unexpected expense.
Thanks, Scott. Any questions for Scott? Janet?
Yeah, Scott, what is the fire protection capability of these composite shingles?
It seemed to be, from what I've read, is they're very fire resistant. I mean, maybe not quite to the level of a steel roof from that standpoint, but they seem to be engineered to be part of new fire regulations when it comes to fire retardancy throughout the building.
Bev?
Thank you. I'm glad that roof is finally going to be replaced. My question to you is, the group that's going to do it, Remember Me Roofing, do they have a track record? How long have they been around? And also, how long have these composite shingles been around? And do we have any data on how reliable they are?
So from the actual Remember Me Roofing company, they came recommended through a contractor that I've used in the past and who I trust. They're part of in my prior position, I was dealing with they're more of a larger scale roofing company, so they don't take care necessarily of the residential side. But when I went to them for advice, this is a company that they passed on to me. And based on my interaction with them, they seem to be very professional, and their quote is coming in significantly under where a couple of the other ones had. But their proposal was very thorough. Which it was different from the original quote that we did receive. So McKay Roofing are the people that did the repairs on the roof to mitigate the issue to this point. And their proposal in terms of thoroughness was a little underwhelming from my side. So that combined with the kind of the recommendation from a company that I did trust is helping me to lean that way. On the actual composite shingle side of things, I don't necessarily have the data to back it up, but it seems to be a more popular solution. It is a similar, so both companies did recommend a similar shingle. They didn't recommend the straight asphalt shingle as of the past, so it seems to be a wave of the future, but I don't necessarily have the data on at this point.
So this company, they have a track record. They have been around for 5 or 10 years
Yes,
or?
yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks again. John, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know whether at any point in time there was consideration given to the use of solar panels at Mill of Kintail. And if that did come up, is there any particular type of roofing that would be preferable? Should solar panels at some point in time be installed?
We hadn't specifically looked at solar panels for the property as of yet. I'm not sure how it would take to solar in that spot, just based on where the trees are around the actual building. It hasn't again, but truthfully, I haven't looked into it in that much detail. But I mean, I have seen in certain spots that solar panels have been placed on shingle roofs, so it's not to say that it can't specifically be done. There are also, I've seen the option where solar panels have been placed in the actual open areas of properties, which could be another option as well. We have, because the museum sits down so low, there might be a better option up top in the higher point of the property that might get better solar, I guess, exposure, for lack of a better term, or it might be a better spot. But I haven't had a chance to fully look into that option yet.
Helen.
Yes, I agree with this proposal, and it sounds like it really needs to get done, but I just wonder, I have been looking into roofing too for my own home, and I understand that there's a solar shingle that you can buy, and I had almost the same question as John, because I think we need to be looking at anything we can get some solar benefits from. I think it would be really good. I just wondered if you're aware of those shingles. They're very expensive, of course, but it might be something business side we might need to be thinking about.
So a couple of things. Definitely, since I've come here, I've been talking to everyone about solar opportunities. And one of the things, I used to sit on on the board of a co-op in Ottawa that does solar. So one of the things we need to keep in mind when we're exploring solar is the upfront cost and operating cost. And when you think about the museum, regardless of what Scott was saying about trees, which is a huge issue, is the cost effectiveness of installing solar at a site that only uses power for 5 months of the year. So I don't think it would ever necessarily be a cost-effective investment at that particular building. And but at other sites on the property, definitely there's an opportunity. There's also an opportunity here in our parking lot, because this is south facing the parking lot at this building, particularly when you look down the road, when we all of us as citizens evolve eventually to EV, then there's an opportunity not only of us changing our fleet, but also needing to power up here, et cetera. And visitors like yourselves, especially coming in the distance, you will want to be able to power your vehicle. So the closer you have your power generation to the area of use, the better, the more cost effective. And you want to go with volume as well. So I'm really pleased to hear there's an interest in solar, because it's certainly an interest of mine personally. But we need to be very tactical in where and how we apply it.
Anyone else with questions or comments? Don't see any. Okay, all in favor of the motion put forward? The motion is carried. Those are all of our decisions, except when to adjourn the meeting later, but we have some information items coming up. And starting with item 5 on the agenda, a needs assessment update. Turn the floor over to Sally.
Can the members at home see this? Okay, great. Okie doke. So the needs assessment is a document that we created back when we did the interim financial plan in 2020. And it's proven to be a very good tool for at the staff level, management level, for us to get everything on the table so that we can see what the needs of the organization are and then to prioritize them. So what you have in front of you are two very lengthy tables, one focused on programs and services and the other on capital. Now, these lists are like I wouldn't necessarily call a wish list, but they're definitely a long list. It doesn't necessarily represent what we're able to do as an organization within the current 5-year strategic plan, but we want to have them on the list so that we don't lose sight of them. And also so that we can use this long list to prioritize. So we do undertake a risk analysis to help us prioritize these various project needs. And we do update it and adjust it annually because, well, let's just say the past 4 years has been full of change and it's been essential to adjust. Also, as we get more information, for instance, some of the studies that Euro mentioned earlier, and the work that Scott's spoken to, things evolve and something that wasn't a priority. We were originally, I think, scheduled to do the roof in 2028. Things changed. So, things adjust year over year. The ratings that you see in terms of the risk analysis is based upon a do nothing scenario. So if we did nothing, what's the likelihood of there being a negative impact and what would be the consequence of that impact? And so obviously if something high likelihood of something negative happening and the consequence of that is high, then it's going to score high. Now, things that are regulatory in nature, are automatically high. We cannot be as an organization in non-compliance. Therefore, anything that has a regulatory requirement is automatically high and prioritized. These are not numeric scores. These are the judgment calls of the management team. So they're subjective and they are open to discussion. And that's why one reason why we table them to you is to allow you the opportunity to question us on it and to have, a discussion around it. As well, because they're subjective, you're looking at relative rankings within a subject matter area. So Euro has done all the ones within his area. Scott has done all the ones in his area. Do not conflate a high water management risk with a high property management risk. They do not necessarily, correlate. So it's just important when you're looking at the tool to understand how it was developed and is used. So we're happy to answer any questions that, if you went through the document and you have questions on it. I haven't, put any in the PowerPoint here, so happy to answer questions that you may have.
The floor is open to questions. Going once. John.
Thanks, Chair. I see that the scheme is then used for the work plans. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I guess from a timing point of view, I could raise some of the questions I have now at this juncture or wait for the work plans. And I probably prefer to wait for the work plans because I think I can then be a little more specific about the items. And so I just wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
Paul and then Bev.
So Sally, I guess my question is to you. I know from going through these exercises in my past life that when you get into subjective situations, people tend to feel that everything that's under their bailiwick is high. So have you, as an oversight, ground truth this so that you're comfortable with what is a high, so that there's consistency across it? Because I sort of read through it and I said, geez, that's a lot of high stuff in certain areas. And I thought, well, maybe that's the individual's slant on that. So I just want to confirm that it has been reviewed by you and that you're comfortable with the levels given.
So yes, I am comfortable. One of the things that we need to realize, particularly on the asset management side of things, is with the dam infrastructure, is there were many years where we weren't doing dam safety reviews in compliance with industry practice. So there's a lot of ground to be made up there. And so though a dam safety review sounds like a nice to have, it's actually not just best practice. It is something we need to be doing for all of our dam structures in a regular manner, and we're in catch-up mode on those. On some of the other things, they may seem minor, but at our conservation areas, we're always of concern are slip, trips, and falls to our to the people who are attending our sites. And so, you know, a couple of the projects that we completed last year and we'll be working on this year are boardwalks. And boardwalks lift over time and they warp over time. And we have a lot of, particularly at Purden, a lot of elderly people who visit that site. So something that intuitively, you know, you might say, why is that so critical? It's more from a health and safety, protecting our users than necessarily because of an aesthetic need.
Thank you. The land conservation inventory that could you talk a little bit about that? Do you have to declare all your land? Do you give it a rating? And I know that the Conservative government has asked for it, but how do you see that all falling down?
I hope it doesn't fall down. Okay, so the provincial regulation requires us to do a fairly comprehensive inventory of all our properties. So this would include properties that I think was back in the 80s that we acquired through expropriation in flood zones. Was it the 80s, Alex? Do you recall?
It was pre-1990.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a handful of very small parcels. They need to show up. Of course, all our conservation areas and this property need to show up. And so we have finished most of it. It was a priority for me before Ross retired last year to extract that knowledge out of him. And we had to, you know, find a lot of historical documents. The question I think you were really getting at, though, is there's an element in the regulation that asks us to determine whether or not we think the property would be suitable for development. I don't think that's going to affect us in this authority area. There's been no criteria provided upon which you would make that assessment. Conservation Ontario is collaborating with all the member conservation authorities to try to put meat on that bone. But as I said, I really don't think that's going to be an issue for our authority. The one that's in an urban area is owned by the city, and it's a stormwater, you know, wetland restoration site. So Morris Island conceivably could be, you know, converted to estate lots, again, owned by the city of Ottawa and OPG. So not a concern for us. And the rest of them, I just don't see it happening. I'm not concerned about that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Oh, we'll move on to the next item, which is the 2023 work plan.
So picking up where the needs assessment leaves on, we left off, we did put together a work plan, and it's color coded to hopefully help you navigate it a bit. The things that you might want to focus in on are the things that are purple, because they're things that are going to be coming to the board at some point in time. But it's to give you an understanding a bit about how we're going to, you know, what special projects we will focus on this year. But on that, I wanted to point out a couple of key things. Most of the work that happens by the employees in this building and offsite is routine operations. So what you're seeing on this work plan are more or less special projects. So it's us trying to shoehorn in, making progress across a variety of fronts while we're continuing to deliver day-to-day services. So within finance, operations, planning, and regulations, easily 80 to 90% of the workload of employees is routine operations. They're processing applications, they're processing, you know, invoices, et cetera. They're mowing lawns, they're doing hazard tree, you know, assessments and removal. So they're doing dam operations, they're doing maintenance work on our gauge systems. So, you know, a huge amount of work is simply done maintaining current service. The engineering group, however, has evolved in recent years. And though I don't have timesheet-based numbers for you, just for today, I would say roughly 30% is routine operations. As we've moved forward over the current life of the 2021-25 strategic plan, we really have made a lot of effort to address the needs that were identified for asset management and the goal to really up our game on asset management. So a lot of the work that's done by some of the engineers and engineering technicians is really to bring us up to where we need to be on our asset management. So a lot of the special projects you would see are of an engineering or technical support kind of nature. The work plan is subject to adjustment over time. We've notionally put down on a month-over-month basis when we hope to, for example, table things here at the board. But it will be adjusted as demands and resources change over time. But as things stand right now, this is where we're hoping to be.
John, you had questions from earlier.
I do, and I apologize. I printed off certain pages, but I didn't correlate them with the agenda item. So in fact, still think it will work out because these are more about the needs assessment update, but I'm really looking just for updates on those updates because there are several there that I know of are of interest to the Public Advisory Committee. So with that in mind, I'll deal with them one at a time. And if you could just tell us where things are at. The first one, and I think touched upon briefly, it's prepare the conservation land inventory. But then there's also the issue of the land use assessment that's going on in Eastern Ontario. And what are the sort of next steps once that's completed? I mean, what are we going to do with that information? How is it going to be used and to what end?
Thank you. Okie doke. So the land use assessment is being done in partnership with RBCA and South Nation. It's using our new LiDAR data and the most recent LiDAR data being your XYZ coordinates, literally millions of data points that map out the elevation across our watersheds. They're combining that with the most recent DRAPE data. DRAPE is a provincially collected aerial photography set. 2020 is the most recent? 2019. So they're going to be combining the elevation data with the photographic data, and South Nation is running the project. They're project managing it for us. They're hiring staff to do it. We're just consulting to them to do our watershed while they're at it. And so by the end of the project, all of our watershed and pretty much all of your municipalities, due to the coverage of the study, will have up-to-date land use planning data. So now this is data, the land will be categorized for watershed management purposes, not necessarily how you would use it for land use planning, but there'll be significant overlap, obviously. So, so this will be a data set that we can share with you. How we will use it is it's a critical input tool to the modeling work that Euro and his team are doing of the watershed, because how land is used directly affects the speed with which it either infiltrates or runs off. So having an up-to-date land use cover mapping will allow Euro to do further analysis and on his watershed model to refine it. And then the goal will be to update it as changes occur on the landscape. And that way we'll be able to do predictive analysis as your municipalities develop, either lakeside or in communities, how we will see water patterns on the watershed change and evolve, both in terms of runoff, but also demand. So there's the two variables.
Thank you. I think one other application that's been raised and I think has value in this context is future environmental report cards. just having a better understanding of what the land use is and being able to track that is extremely informative. Can I try another one, Chair? Review of wetlands in growth areas. And, you know, this one has a particular relevance through a climate change lens, but I also know that it's got some complexities with it. And I wanted to give us an update, please.
So we began work on this last year with some funding we received from the foundation. And so what we're looking at is wetlands under growth pressure. And where we got to is we were able to delineate and map those areas, and not just, you know, around, for instance, Carlton Place and Beckwith and Mississippi Wells up in Elmont area as well, but where there's a lot of intensification around Lakeside and into the upper watershed. The reason why this is important is, you know, well, there's varied reasons, but one of them is because of the role that wetlands play in erosion mitigation, in water retention during, you know, spring freshet, for example, and also in providing base flow during the summer season. So, you know, Euro was mentioning earlier, we only really have 6 reservoirs that are able to supplement base flow in the river system during the dry summer months. The rest is being held by wetlands. They're not called reservoirs, but that's how they function. They function as reservoirs. So by delineating these various wetlands across the watershed and identifying which ones are under pressure, our objective would then be to engage with your local municipalities in conversations about, you know, what you might want to do in those areas, but also from a stewardship perspective, us engaging with those landowners and focusing our programs on those owners to ensure that landowners are aware of the functions and the programs available, and that they get the resources they need to do you know, land management on those properties. So where we stand on the project is that we've done the first, you know, swath analysis of where these pressure areas are, but we have not been able to take it the next step to then look at targeting our stewardship programs or engaging with the municipalities. And I'd have to say that as we're kind of figuring out and navigating the Bill 23 environment, we're trying to figure out what we can and can't do in this regard, because that may change. As well, we're looking from a resource perspective, what resources we may have available to dedicate to continue with the next step of that work.
Thank you. And the last comment I have, Chair, is attributable to you. Yes. So in the corridor, as both the two of us were walking back from the trade show, we compared notes and said, from a communication point of view, what are future applications of that kind of trade show? And there was another aspect, but still associated with the trade show, and that is, are we making the best use of our drone technology from a communications point of view? So case in point, drone imagery of our conservation areas and having virtual tours, things of that nature. Thank you.
So on the drone technology, I think we've had it, we're still counting weeks. So, but I would say the long list that people have come up with for Euro and his team is very long. So absolutely, we see phenomenal opportunities associated with the drone. As for the trade show, I think everybody in the building really enjoyed doing it, and we all see an opportunity to do it again. And it's a question of what that might look like. We were thinking if Carlton Place does a doors open event, we could do that. Or we could just host an open house ourselves, but we haven't sort of nailed down that yet. I think I'm supposed to follow up with Carlton Place and find out if you guys have a date yet.
We do, and I was supposed to follow up with you and I didn't.
Okay, so
That's on me.
So there you go. Well, it's definitely something we want to pursue.
Thanks, John. Richard.
A couple of just follow-up questions. The wetlands the study that you're doing, is that on lands that are zoned wetlands? Or is that on unzoned wetlands?
It would be on lands that meet the Conservation Authorities Act definition of wetlands. So under section 28.
That's a political answer. What is?
Well, no, that's a
is it zoned
that's a
wetlands?
truthful answer because not everything that we identify as a wetland has been zoned in a municipal zoning bylaw as a wetland. And that would vary depending on how each municipality chooses. Some of them might be identified as hazard land or environmental land. So how they show up in a municipal zoning bylaw will vary by municipality, but we have identified them as meeting the definition of a wetland under section 28 of the Conservation Authorities Act.
And by saying we have done that, is that the study to do that or,
That was the work that was completed in 2021, which
and can we get a copy of that?
Well, here's the deal, is we were actually going to focus on wetlands at the next meeting. So how about we present our findings to you then? Right on.
And the trade show, I think I think that was very good. And I think it should be something that you do for all municipal politicians, that you just put it out to the municipalities and invite municipal politicians there so that you can educate the whole council on what is done here and who does it, and take that focus, maybe be the first step of doing a trade show like that.
Thanks, Richard. Anyone else have questions or comments? Mary Lou?
I just wanted to second what Richard said, because I'm a Brown newbie and I had no understanding of what it was. I had a concept that it would be everything set up in a room like this, and you'd wander from booth to booth. So I felt really badly when I was late, and it had already started, but I found it absolutely fascinating. Walked away from here about 12 inches off the ground. That reveals my age. And I second what Richard says. I would think we could try to convince most of the rest of them to come to a trade show to find out. And maybe if it's a year down the road, we could combine some things like lovely drone visits of the watershed and a few information sessions that are more booth-like than what we had. But I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's nice to hear. And it's something to consider is expanding the trade show and maybe folding it in with the tour that usually happens in June, where a number of people end up going out into the field, which is also a rewarding thing that you'll find as new members of the board. When you won't have to don hip boots, but you will need your bug spray when you're out there in the field. But expanding that opportunity to more than just the members of the board, but our colleagues on our municipal councils, local media as well, to just get the story about the work that this place does out there. Anything else on this item? Then we'll move on to the watershed plan action items update. Item 7, Sally.
Okay, because most members were not here when we developed the watershed plan, I'm just going to take a few minutes to give you a bit of background on it. So the Mississippi River Watershed Plan was originally prepared in 1983. And as outlined in the report that you have in front of you, there have been a lot of pressures on the watershed in recent years and predicted going forward. We've had 6 large floods in the past recent years, 4 droughts in the past 7 years. as mentioned, we have a lot of aging infrastructure that we're having to turn our attention to. And particularly if we're looking at redesigning it to meet future needs, it's, really important that we understand what's happening on the landscape. We've had an increasing occurrence of blue-green algae and invasive species. We had a query earlier this year from North Frontenac about Phragmites on Mazenod Lake, for example. And of course, this has been one of the fastest growing areas in Canada. So there's, increasing demands on the natural systems in this area. So for all of these reasons, it was really important for us to revisit the Mississippi River Watershed Plan. So one thing I just want to point out off the top is it was just for the Mississippi River. It didn't include the Carp River watershed. That plan was done by the city of Ottawa in 2004. So anything I'm going to say to you going forward just relates to the Mississippi River, okay? So a couple of the key things that when we were developing the watershed plan was it needed to be integrated. So that graphic on the right shows you that we're really trying to take a very comprehensive examination of all the pressures on the watershed and the impact they would have on the water resources in particular. The plan that was developed is adaptive in nature in that it allows for us to monitor what's happening on the landscape over time and adjust as needed. And then lastly, it's interjurisdictional because one of the key things we highlighted earlier in the study process was how much all of us, and when all of us, I mean yourselves, conservation authorities, landowners, the province, the feds, and any number of NGOs play in water management. It's a highly regulated interjurisdictional managed resource. And then lastly, the plan itself set 8 goals with several objectives thereunder, and it's very comprehensive. So just to recap the process we went through, because it has a very broad scope and affects literally, tens of thousands of people over almost 4,000 square kilometers. So we started in 2019 and we formed a public advisory committee, which was had a cross-sectoral representation. It had a developer on it. It had a water hydro producer on it. It had forestry. It had recreational tourism. And of course, it had members from lake associations. So it was really important for us to form this advisory committee to act as a sounding board throughout the project. And the first period of work, 2019 into early 2020, was spent drafting 4 background reports, which provide a really good comprehensive understanding of the watershed. And we shared this with all your municipalities. And I sat down with almost, I think, every one of your CAOs except at the City of Ottawa, and walk them through it and help them to understand it, these various background reports. And of course, we took them out to the public. Now, you'll see the timing on this, spring 2020, it didn't necessarily unfold exactly as how we had planned, because that's when, of course, we're just celebrating, I put in quotation marks, 3 years of COVID. So it was challenging to get the public interest and engagement that we were looking for, but we did get good feedback. And what we ended up doing over the course of the project was evolving, as we all did, to a Zoom type presentation environment. But based upon those background reports, we then developed topic specific discussion papers. And so each of them really zeroed in on an area of interest to the members of the public. So for example, one was on tourism, one was on agriculture. And what those discussion papers helped to do was not only identify what the issues are, but options for addressing those issues and how we might move forward on those issues, so that a person didn't have to go through, inch thick document to figure out what was of interest to them. And those discussion papers and the Zoom meetings we had around those were really well attended, and lots of good feedback. And from those, that's what helped us to then draft the watershed plan. And it came to the board for approval in July of 21. So you can see it was quite a lengthy process. We took it in a stepped approach, and there was a lot of community engagement. So I mentioned there were 8 goals. So they related to the 8 themes that were identified as a result of those background reports. So, you know, as I mentioned off the top, water is managed at so many levels and affected by so many that whatever plan we came up with needed to be integrated and collaborative. It had to address water management. And when we use the term water management, we mean from a quantity and flow perspective, or, you know, levels and flow. Natural hazards. So this would include risk to people and property is from flooding, erosion, unstable slopes and soils. And this is our category 1 core mandate under our legislation, as well as water quality, which is also part of our core mandate. It had to address the existing and projected impacts of climate change, as well as the growth that is occurring on the landscape. And lastly, it needed to look at how we're going to maintain and enhance those valued natural features and systems that both have ecological value as well as a infrastructure value to us and how we manage the water in the system. And lastly, you know, supporting learning and environmental stewardship so that people care about the landscape and understand what they can do to protect it. So from those goals, we developed any number of objectives and lots of actions, 34 actions in total. So the ones I've highlighted here where we're making progress, after that project was completed, the PAC, the Public Advisory Committee, was disbanded. But one of the key recommendations of the plan was, listen, this PAC worked really well. We'd like to have it on a go-forward basis. And so we did establish just last fall a new PAC to help us on implementation of the watershed plan. And one of the things that they felt was critical and important was we needed to raise awareness within the watershed of the issues that were identified in the watershed plan and some of the work that the Conservation Authority is doing in that regard. As Euro mentioned, I think at our AGM, he's made tremendous progress on development of the model, and we feel we're going to be in a good position to be using it in the coming year. We've done a lot of rehabilitation and expansion of our hydrometric network. There was a lot of stations that were non-functional. So we've made good work, a lot of strides in terms of getting them up and running again and bringing in new technology. Some of you who were on the board last year, you had a presentation from a summer student who I've recently learned is coming back, who developed a system which we consider proprietary, which was he built and designed and built a system with colleagues here at the Conservation Authority. And it's really enhanced our capabilities here at the authority. We started the ALICE program to support agricultural stewardship, particularly in taking lands that are no longer highly productive and where appropriate, maybe converting them to wetlands or taking wetlands and setting them aside. And we started the ice monitoring program. That's where we bought that was the primary purpose for us buying the drone. But as John has said, we'll be able to leverage that. And we have a licensed operator. We're very fortunate that one of our employees has had a license to begin with. We're in the process right now of reviewing the monitoring program, and I hope to have this in front of you next month when we cover all things wetlands, because some of the work there is instructive with that. And similarly, we commenced work on the land conservation strategy. This is another new regulatory requirement that it's tied very much, Bev, to that inventory, in that this strategy is to document where and why a conservation authority would buy or divest of land. So that's what the land conservation strategy is to do. And we've started work on that last year. So I just wanted to highlight some of the work that is progressing under the watershed plan and give you a bit of background on the plan itself.
Thanks, Sally. Does anyone have any questions for Sally? There's a lot of stuff in these reports. John?
Thanks, Chair. More of a comment in figure one. I think it really is useful because of wanting to use a climate change lens as we move forward to in fact identify that as a key stressor. So a recommendation for future use, increasing climate change impacts. We've all seen extreme weather events. We've seen how it's affecting our ability to not be as dependent upon historical data in terms of managing water flows and levels. So it's here, it's now, and it's important. Thanks.
I think we debated having it in. Mainly, the only comment I'd say is that the flooding, the droughts, the blue-green algae and the invasive species are sort of derivatives of, in part, of climate change. And so I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm just saying we weren't, how you present these things, but we can absolutely add climate change as a separate one.
Thanks. Anyone else? Richard?
I guess I just think the climate change, I think that's certainly here and now, as John says, but to be able to say that we can predict what it's going to do, I think that's a bit out there. I think that the idea of having more water in the reservoirs in the fall, that's something certainly going to have to look at, but I just don't get the point of not the point, but how you're going to create a new model when you don't know what the data is going to be. That the data is going to be continually change. The thing that's going to be predictable, it's going to change. That's what's predictable. We've been using 100-year-old data built up over 100 years. When it's going to be changing, we're not going to have that database to base our plan on. So I think the biggest thing is going to be that it's going to change, and how we're going to adapt is going to be maybe on the fly a little bit. But those invasive species and all those other things, that's here now too, and that all has to be done. But we're not going to be as predictable as what we have been in the last 30 years.
Well, I was going to give an initial answer and then give Euro the opportunity if he wanted to expand. So MVCA started doing this kind of analysis about 10 years ago. And I would say it's a really strongly evolving science. Whenever you're doing predictive analysis, it's always, there's inherent uncertainty. But I would say that as we are getting more recent data from current years, it's helping. And I think what we also, we can never predict with certainty, but what we're getting a better feel for are the trends. So, and how we manage to those trends, I think will be critical.
Well, I was going to ask sort of a question related to what Richard said, which is my understanding is that the whole point of building a river model, a watershed model with all the elevation and drape imagery is that you can run scenarios so that in fact, you may not be sure of where it's going, but you can say, well, what if this happened? What if this happened? So you end up with a range and then you determine how you might want to respond with a probabilistic view, right? Okay, that's what.
Thanks for that. Any other comments? We move on to our next report, which is an update on municipal MOU and CAA discussions.
Okay, so on this, we basically had to take a bit of a hiatus in the fall with Bill 23 and more recently earlier this year, because the work that we had done, particularly on MOUs for municipal planning services, obviously had to take a significant change. And we've spent the past 8 to 12 weeks or 10 weeks bringing your municipal planners up to speed. And I think we're finally in a position where we've done the knowledge transfer. So where we stand right now then is that all of your municipalities with the exception of North Frontenac, which has yet to bring it back to council, has basically indicated that you're supportive of continuing to provide the current historical levels of financial support to category 2 and 3 services. But the main proviso on that was whether or not the city of Ottawa was going to continue to contribute, that it was widely understood and acknowledged that the financials change significantly if the city withdraws. So I need to follow up a big step for myself and the other 2 CAs in the city of Ottawa. So RVCA and South Nation is to engage with the city of Ottawa to answer that question. In the meantime, there are other conservation authorities in Ontario, obviously, who are in a similar predicament to us. Either there's one or more major municipalities that either needs to decide they're in or out and what they're in or out on. And some of them have pushed forward and have already secured those agreements, but a lot of us are in this kind of, I won't call it limbo, but this period of uncertainty where we really need to nail down our larger municipalities and their contributions. So what I'm proposing to do is, in parallel to engaging with the city of Ottawa, because I cannot predict the speed with which we will get feedback from staff and management and council at the city of Ottawa, is to continue to work to nail down the numbers on our side. We'll do analysis of with and without or partial investment from the city of Ottawa on some of these things. We've also been looking quite hard at other revenue sources and what the likelihood is of securing those. I'll share with you that I had a really positive conversation. Bev, I was going to talk to you about this at the end of the meeting, but with a potential foundation that might support the museum or other activities at the Milliken Tail. So, we're continuing to pursue those in parallel. But at some point, I'm going to have to, just because of the timelines we're talking about, come to your CAOs with a draft proposal, and it may be an agreement that has with or without, funding support from the city of Ottawa or different tiers of investment from the city of Ottawa. So we're still trying to navigate that, but I just wanted to give you an update of where we're at because I'm sensitive to the fact that it was a key message I heard from all of you that you were willing to support if the city of Ottawa was continuing to support, but that you would have to rethink it if the city didn't. And I respect that decision of all your councils. So happy to answer any questions on that.
Anyone? I think that was pretty clear. Yes. Yes.
I don't know that Clark heard that.
No, I heard it.
Seeing no further questions, we'll move on in the agenda. We've got item 9, which is the 2022 annual report. It's included in your package. I invite you to read through it. I don't think there's any particularly glowing highlights that we want to point out.
Just for the benefit of the folks in the room, I did draw out the highlights. I mean, as I mentioned, depending on what group you're in, you're either very much focused on special projects or you're doing day to day. But I did want to congratulate the whole organization on some of these key achievements that we did outline in the annual report, including that, we have one of the best processing times in the province. 95% or more of our applications are processed within the guidelines. So these aren't even regulatory requirements. So we only received one appeal request last year. So there's just a lot of good work being done here. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate the management team and all of their staff on a really good year in 2022.
Hear, hear. And we also have the GM update report. Are there any highlights you wanted to bring to our attention there? I'd like to welcome Lauren to the team. I see she joined us at the beginning of the beginning of the month. And congratulations on getting that new truck. It looks like it was a steal.
Yeah, kudos to Scott. And I'll just say that man was calling all over the province trying to nail down a vehicle. So well done, Scott. And no, aside from that, I don't have anything that other than the one thing Euro cautioned me against putting in though was the WECI grant. We're 99.9% sure we got it, but didn't want to put it in writing till we know for sure.
Thanks for that, Sally. And one item left, we're looking to adjourn the meeting at 2:18. The resolve of the Board of Directors meeting be adjourned, moved by Paul Kehoe, seconded by Helen Yangch. All in favor? Thanks a lot, folks.
It gets such easy.